Hello, everyone. Dean on the street, host of the Dean Blechman Show, still here in Fort Lauderdale. My featured guest, Mitch Swergold, MitchSwergold.com. Having some great episodes here. Let's hit it again, Mitch. What is stress, and is there a better way to understand stress?
I think, Dean, that's a really important question because, first of all, we always need to define our terms. What is stress? Stress is, this is stress, but it's no big deal. The stress we're talking about is of two basic sorts. And the way I define stress is when the demands exceed resources for dealing with it. So if you think about lifting a weight, and you lift a weight that's a pound or two heavier than the last one you lifted, or you lift one or two more reps, you're challenging yourself by going slightly outside your boundary, and you're then able to meet that and with greater resources, and you're able to continuously do that. And that's how personal growth works. Wow. It's very iterative. People generally don't wake up enlightened one day, although it can happen. What happens is we slowly but surely grow. And it's the same thing with our stress in our lives. If we have some kind of stressor, and it's not terribly major, but it's a little more than something we've dealt with before, we're going to be able to find those resources that we didn't have previously and be able to meet that stressor. Mm-hmm. And the next time, we can meet something that's even a little bit bigger than that.
Wow.
That's the first type. Now, there's a second, and that's healthy stress. Then there's what we think of as unhealthy stress. And that's where all of a sudden we're trying to lift an extra 100 pounds all at once.
Right.
So, of course, that doesn't happen. And in fact, when we try to lift it, we injure ourselves. And that's called trauma. So what we're dealing with is how do we deal with when we've got all of that trauma or toxic stress that's building up? Because there's another factor, and that is that people tend to look at, traditionally, stress is very transactional. I had this stressful experience with someone in my life, or with myself, or with the amount of work I had, or whatever the case might be. Or I had a stressful week, or even I had a stressful year, but it's always transactional. What we're not looking at is the cumulative effects of stress, and those build up inside of us. So we need practices in order to help us to manage those stress levels better, because that stress is manifested by chemicals in our body that are released every single time we're stressed. The number one chemical is cortisol, and it's neurotoxic. It's destroying your brain cells and other parts of your body. And so what we want to do is try to manage that. So it's really important to understand these different perspectives on stress. And now here's the quote-unquote trick question about it, and that is, so can toxic stress actually be managed in a completely different way? And the answer is yes, and it requires seeing the world from a totally different perspective, which brings us back to the conversation we had before about cancer and epigenetics.
Wow. And
transforming from victim to victor. Because when we're a victor, when our attitude is right, when we've learned to see things from a completely different perspective, we're able to handle even the 100-pound weight without damaging ourselves. So what I like to share with people about this is it's a very big subject, and it's very different from anything I ever personally learned before or was exposed to. And the result is that we need to have an open mind. They say the mind is like a parachute. It works best when it's open. So if you live up north like I used to, and Dean does, then you know that when you walk into a restaurant in the dead of winter on a really cold night, what are you wearing?
You're wearing a heavy coat, and gloves, sometimes if there's snow, boots.
And a hat, and
to hold it.
The coat might go all the way to your feet, right? And it's big. Now, do you want to take that to the table with you?
No.
So what do you do with it?
You hang it up.
Where?
Coat rack, or you know.
Yeah, you check it at the door.
Check it at the door.
Coat check,
yes.
right? All right.
Depends if they have a coat check.
Right.
A lot of places don't have coat check.
Sure. or you put it on the wall on the hook.
But whatever the case is, you don't want it at your table.
You don't want it at the table.
Right.
Why? Because it's going to interfere with what you are there to do, which is eat and enjoy your meal. It's the same thing with your knowledge and what you think you know. And what I learned is to check my knowledge at the door. Because if I bring it in to learn something about that is really very opposite of what I've always learned, then if I'm trying to apply what I think I know to something that's completely different, I'm going to be applying judgment.
Wow.
And when I do that, I necessarily am cutting myself off from seeing that different perspective. You can pick up your knowledge on your way out with your coat. But while you're there at the table, keep an open mind.
Wow. Hey, Mitch, this all sounds great, but everything that you're saying, your personal experience, what triggered you after practicing law and being involved with finance, hedge funds, and all the intensity that went with that. I mean, what really changed you, that changes a lot of people, is when they go through a personal health crisis.
Yeah.
Isn't that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. How about all the stress that people go through? The amount of stress they go through that is not related to a health crisis. That's really a lot of the world with, don't sweat the small stuff kind of
Absolutely.
situation. But that's really something that we've got to really hit next with a solution to, because just short of a health crisis in your life or a friend or a family member, a lot of that triggers people to go in a different direction to take care of themselves.
Absolutely.
So there's millions of people out there throughout the world that aren't dealing with a health crisis personally or with friends or family. And, there's other things that are crisis or, very stressful to them in their day-to-day lives. So I think that really leaves us to pretty much the next segment that we're going to lead into on which you believe in so much that we're going to come back to, is why meditation is so important and how we can use meditation to reduce stress. And I know it's something that I'm very much interested in.
Sounds good, Dean.
So thanks again for being with us today. Mitch Swergold from MitchSwergold.com. And this has been Dean on the Street, host of the Dean Blechman Show. We're going to see you real soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye now. Hello, everyone. Dean on the Street, host of the Dean Blechman Show, down here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My featured guest, Mitch Swergold of MitchSwergold.com. Inspiring conversations again with someone that his world was once being a practicing an attorney and very much a hedge fund manager and very involved in finance. And now it's about inspiring and empowerment and improving the quality of people's lives. So this has been, the episodes continue, and I'm just fascinated with everything that you're sharing with my audience, Mitch.
Well, thanks, Dean. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
You bet. Let's go back to meditation, where we left off on the last episode. Why is meditation so important, and how can everybody use meditation on a daily basis to reduce stress?
Great question. So, Dean, change is hard, and it's hard only because we don't really know how to do it. We talked about how New Year's resolutions, they're the same every year. Why? Because we don't know how to effect change. And it usually takes, as you were mentioning, some kind of health crisis to really force us into, boom, a major hard reset. But change is something that, as I noted when we were talking about stress, we can do gradually by pushing our boundaries a little bit more, and getting stronger and increasing our resources to deal with stress or challenges in life or things that we want to change. And when we recognize how the system works, this is crucial. So before we were talking about stress, And I think that we tend to think of this mind-body connection. But I think it's a little bit different. I think that there is no connection. And the reason is because it's one system, not two systems. So you cannot connect what is one because it is just one.
Wow.
And when you start to recognize that, and you start to recognize that everything that you think is actually having an impact on your epigenome, and therefore it's affecting your health, it's affecting your well-being, it's affecting your way of being in relationships and with yourself, you can recognize that we can effect change simply through thought. Which, when I first heard that, sounded completely out of this world crazy. But now I understand scientifically is demonstrably true. So the first and most important thing is don't believe everything you think. Because when you do, and most of us have a lot of negative thoughts, those are not good thoughts to believe. You know, we have, scientists estimate, about 70,000 thoughts a day. And over 90% of those are the same thoughts we had yesterday. And over 70% of them are negative, which is due to our negativity bias, which was for survival purposes on the African savanna. And, you know, we're evolved beings, but those things stuck with us. And that's why we're still here and weren't eaten by the lion like somebody else was. So what meditation is about helping us with that process of effecting our own growth and change. Meditation is, John Kabat-Zinn, who's very famous, said, meditation is about being with yourself and learning something about who that is. So you might think, well, Mitch, I kind of know who I am. I mean, I've been around for 50, 60, 70 years, however long each person has been around, 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, whatever. But when we recognize that 95% of all of our thoughts, behaviors, and beliefs are unconscious, all of a sudden, we don't know ourselves because we only know the 5%.
Wow.
So what I help people to do is to tap into the unconscious mind until we learn to see our unconscious patterns of mind. We're not able to really understand who we are and how we need to change in the first place. Because how are you going to make a change if you don't know what that change needs to be, if you can't see yourself? Sitting in meditation helps us to learn to see ourselves. Now, I know what you're thinking because 95 to 98% of all people that I deal with who haven't meditated in a meaningful way tell me, Mitch, I can't meditate. I'm just not good at it. I don't like it. I can't stop my thoughts. It's unpleasant. It's bothersome. It's boring. A million different things.
So how do you get people through the challenges, those barriers? How do you get them through
So the first thing to understand is that there's no such thing as not being good at meditation. Because the whole idea is to witness those thoughts. So I'm going to walk you through in a later episode a meditation, but what we're going to be doing is learning how to see our thoughts and recognize that I am not that. I am not that thought.
Okay.
I am not that belief.
Right.
And speaking of beliefs, which is a very important subject, every single belief that you have, let's set aside religion for the moment because I don't want to go into that, but every single belief you have about yourself, which typically for most people is I'm not good enough, big enough, strong enough, attractive enough, rich enough, smart enough, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, you know, whatever it is, not enough.
You hear that? You hear them all.
Right. All of those beliefs, as well as any positive belief, every belief is definitionally limiting. Why? Because a belief says, I'm putting a stake in the ground that this is how things are, which limits all other possibilities. It excludes them from being possible. And we're expansive beings in a very literal sense. We talked about neuroplasticity and how the brain is constantly creating new neural pathways, and there's something called neurogenesis as well, the birth of new neurons. So it's literally always expanding, although it's at a very, very small scale. So when we recognize that if we keep an open mind and don't feel attached to a particular belief that things are a particular way, that I am a particular way, that my mom's a particular way, that Dean's a particular way, that my friends, coworkers, children, parents, whoever are a particular way, that the world is a particular way. Money's difficult to come by. You know, rich people are awful, poor people are awful, fat people are awful, thin people are awful. You know, all these different belief systems don't serve us. And they limit our ability to see things from a different perspective. And the invitation and how we reduce stress is by transforming our perspective to a different one that serves us. Now, you might say that, so bringing all of this together, we come up with one approach that involves 3 legs to a stool of learning and affecting change. The first is content, some of which we've talked about today, but there's a tremendous amount. 2 is installation, which is done through meditation as well as through exercises. And 3 is application. And that's the really hard part, because that's the part where we're faced with a situation and we choose something that does not feel natural to us, something that does not feel familiar, something that's very different, and we do it anyway. And that requires coaching.
Wow.
And that's how we do it.
Wow. Mitch Swergold, MitchSwergold.com. It just gets more and more inspiring. Not bad for a guy that used to practice law and was very much into managing hedge funds. Incredible.
Thanks.
But we're gonna come back soon. We're gonna have Mitch. He's going to demystify meditation, and you're gonna want to listen to this. So from all of us here at the Dean Blechman Show, this has been Dean on the Street. Everybody have a fantastic day. Bye-bye now.
Bye.